The military landscape of the Middle East was shaken by an event that many are already calling the most significant blow to Israel's defense in recent years. A coordinated airstrike carried out by 10 Syrian fighter jets demolished 30 Israeli Defense Force military outposts in a single night. The attack, launched in the early hours of the morning, resulted in at least 180 Israeli personnel killed and dozens more injured. For many observers, this was not just a tactical strike, but a carefully calibrated response, framed by Syria as retaliation for the bombardment of Gaza, in which more than 1,400 civilians lost their lives in a single day. The sheer effectiveness and surprise of the operation has sparked intense debate about the vulnerability of Israel's defenses, the evolving capabilities of its neighbors, and the shifting balance of deterrence across the region. To understand the scale of what happened, it is essential to first trace the sequence of the Syrian air operation. Around 2:30 a.m. local time, 10 jets took off from an airbase west of Damascus. This was not a hurried mission, but one that bore the hallmarks of meticulous planning. Instead of approaching through conventional air corridors, the Syrian aircraft followed a flight path long, considered unlikely by Israeli intelligence, exploiting gaps in radar coverage. Once inside Israeli airspace, they split into 2 coordinated groups. 5 jets targeted Israel's northern military installations, while the other 5 went west to strike IDF command and communication hubs. Within minutes, precision-guided bombs fell on logistical centers, field communication outposts, and forward command posts that were crucial nodes in Israel's defensive structure. Every identified position was hit at least twice to ensure total destruction, leaving no margin for survival or counteraction. On the ground, the effects were catastrophic. Military positions that had been considered secure collapsed into rubble, armored vehicles caught fire, and stockpiled ammunition ignited in secondary explosions that intensified the destruction. Rescue operations were delayed by the sheer intensity of the strikes. Medical teams arrived only after 20 minutes, by which point entire sites were already leveled. Hospitals in Haifa and Tel Aviv overflowed with the wounded, while evacuation teams struggled to extract survivors from collapsed bunkers and reinforce command posts. The atmosphere was one of chaos and disbelief. For years, eyewitnesses described Israel's the night sky lighting up in waves of orange and red, and with explosions. Yet within the span of less than half an hour, they were turned into smoldering ruins. From a technical standpoint, the operation highlights significant advances in Syrian air capabilities. These were not random bombing runs. The use of precision-guided munitions, dropped with near-simultaneous timing across multiple targets, suggests access to advanced targeting systems and possibly real-time intelligence support. The coordination required to send 10 aircraft into contested airspace, divide them into strike formations, and deliver synchronized attacks reveals a level of training and planning not previously associated with the Syrian Air Force. Some analysts have speculated that electronic warfare support may have been employed to suppress or confuse Israeli radar systems, explaining why the Iron Dome and other air defense networks failed to intercept or even adequately detect the incoming threat. Whether through decoys, jamming, or exploitation of blind zones, the fact remains that Israel's sophisticated defenses were effectively bypassed. The failure of the Iron Dome system in particular has become a focal point of criticism. Marketed for years as the crown jewel of Israeli defense technology, Iron Dome has been celebrated for intercepting short-range rockets from Gaza and southern Lebanon. Yet this attack exposed its limitations. Ballistic missiles and precision airstrikes present a very different challenge from improvised rockets, and in this case, the radar network either did not register the incursion in time or was unable to lock onto fast-moving jet aircraft flying at low altitude. No interceptors were launched effectively, and in several cases, military outposts were struck without any warning sirens being sounded. This has fueled both domestic and international ridicule, with commentators mocking the system as little more than a decorative showpiece that failed its most critical test. The human impact of the strikes cannot be overstated. 180 IDF personnel lost in a single night is a number that resonates deeply within Israeli society, where military service touches nearly every family. Survivors reported the trauma of hearing bombs fall without warning, some describing the sensation as if they were sitting at an execution table. Families of the fallen flooded hospitals and military information centers in search of news, often receiving little more than vague statements from overwhelmed officials. For many, the psychological blow is just as devastating as the physical losses. Soldiers who once believed in the invulnerability of Israel's defenses now openly question whether the myths of superiority were little more than illusions built for political consumption. Politically, the fallout in Israel has been severe. Members of the Knesset have launched fierce criticism at both the military and intelligence community for an establishment long praised for its ability to infiltrate neighboring states and predict threats before they manifest. The failure to anticipate or even detect such a massive air incursion has raised fundamental questions about competence. Editorials in opposition media have gone so far as to lampoon Mossad for being more focused on trivialities than actual threats. While satirical columns mock the IDF as an army that does not function, public anger has swelled, with street-level protests beginning to emerge. Some demanding an end to aggressive operations in Gaza and a redirection of focus toward defending the homeland. The Syrian narrative, by contrast, is one of triumph and warning. Damascus has framed the strikes as a necessary act of defense, a proportional response to the deaths of over 1,400 civilians in Gaza caused by Israeli bombardments. Official statements emphasize that the operation was not just about inflicting losses on Israel, but sending a clear message. As long as Israel targets civilians, it can expect retaliation against its military infrastructure. The precision, coordination, and sheer audacity of the strike were themselves part of the message, demonstrating that Syria, often dismissed as weakened and fractured, retains the ability to deliver meaningful military blows when provoked. Crowds in Syrian cities celebrated the attack with fireworks, while allied groups across the region hailed it as proof that Israel is not untouchable. Reactions from the broader Middle East varied in tone, but were unified in recognizing the significance of the event. Hezbollah praised the strikes as evidence that Israel's aura of invincibility had been shattered. Iran offered full-throated support, calling the operation a necessary step in rebalancing the equation after Gaza. In Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq, media outlets labeled it a historic moment, celebrating what they described as long overdue accountability for Israeli aggression. Even in Egypt and Jordan, states that maintained diplomatic ties with Israel, commentary hinted at quiet satisfaction, with analysts suggesting that Israel's arrogance had invited a humiliating lesson. Arab social media erupted with memes, jokes, and biting satire, mocking Israel's defenses and painting the strikes as a football match in which Israel lost 10-0 without ever touching the ball. Outside the region, responses were more cautious but equally telling. The United States expressed deep concern and reaffirmed its support for Israel in broad terms, yet refrained from endorsing immediate retaliation. Analysts noted Washington's dilemma. As Israel's closest ally, it faces pressure to respond. But as the strikes were directly tied to Israeli actions in Gaza, open endorsement risks accusations of hypocrisy. In Europe, reactions were fractured. The United Kingdom condemned the Syrian strikes but added that Israel must also scale back its operations in Gaza. France called for while Germany remained largely silent. The European Union collectively appeared more focused on crafting diplomatic statements than taking concrete action. Meanwhile, Russia and China took bolder stances, praising Syria's right to defend itself and condemning Israel's prior actions in Gaza. Russian media ran headlines declaring that Israel collapsed in a single night, while Chinese state outlets emphasized that this was evidence of Israel's unchecked violence coming back to haunt it. Both powers called for an emergency session of the UN Security Council, where Israel's allies once again found themselves on the defensive inside Israel. The societal impact of the strikes continues to deepen. Families of soldiers are demanding accountability, while many young recruits and their parents question whether serving on the front lines is worth the risk. Reports have emerged of soldiers refusing deployments to northern outposts, fearing they may be the next targets. Psychologists warn of widespread trauma as both civilians and military personnel grapple with the shock of vulnerability. For decades, Israelis have lived with the belief that their armed forces and technology provide an unbreakable shield. The events of this night have fractured that belief. leaving many with the unsettling awareness that even advanced systems can fail and that enemies once dismissed as weak retain formidable capabilities. The strikes also destabilized Israel's political climate. Opposition parties seized on the incident to criticize the government's prioritization of offensive operations in Gaza over domestic defense. They argue that Israel has grown complacent, too focused on projecting strength abroad while neglecting to secure its own skies. Government officials, meanwhile, struggled to craft a coherent narrative. The official statement that the situation is being evaluated was widely mocked as vague and inadequate. The lack of transparency has only fueled public frustration, with many perceiving the leadership as unwilling or unable to admit the scale of the disaster. The absence of a decisive retaliatory strike further compounds the image of hesitation, especially as Syrian jets were able to return safely to their bases before Israeli aircraft could respond. For military analysts, the key features of the Syrian strike stand out as both tactical achievements and symbolic gestures. The use of low-altitude approaches to evade radar, the split formation strategy, the precision of the munitions, and the synchronized timing all point to an operation designed to maximize impact with minimal exposure. Each of these aspects represents a performance benchmark that surprised observers accustomed to underestimating Syrian capabilities. In terms of design, the operation itself can be viewed as a case study in asymmetric effectiveness. 10 aircraft achieved what large-scale bombardments often failed to deliver: total surprise, concentrated destruction, and a psychological blow disproportionate to the resources expended. As a demonstration, it serves as a unique selling point for Syria's military credibility, altering perceptions of regional balance. For Israel, the incident underscores vulnerabilities that cannot be ignored. No matter how advanced the radar systems, no matter how celebrated the Iron Dome, or how well-funded the intelligence services, the possibility of being outmaneuvered remains real. The strikes raise questions about how defense systems are structured, whether blind spots are being adequately monitored, and how much reliance can truly be placed on technology when human error or complacency creeps in. In many ways, the Syrian operation exploited not just gaps in radar, but gaps in confidence, proving that assumptions of superiority are themselves a weakness to be exploited. The international community is now watching closely to see whether this was an isolated act of retaliation or the opening of a new phase in the conflict. If Syria's declaration is to be taken at face value, the strikes will continue as long as Israel maintains its current pace of operations in Gaza. That prospect alarms not only Israel but also its allies, who fear a broader regional war that could draw in Lebanon, Iran, and potentially other actors. Yet for Syria and its supporters, the strikes represent an overdue assertion of agency in a conflict where 4 years Israel has acted with near impunity. In this sense, the attack was not only about destroying 30 outposts or killing 180 soldiers, it was about reshaping the narrative, proving that even a nation long seen as embattled and weakened can deliver a blow that reverberates globally.